test from Allah. A
Yud
woman who
Daled,
went with
well, hold on. You're on Yud Daled Zayin. We're in the middle of that long Mishnah in the Art Scroll edition. So we're on the case that
oh yeah,
begins.
okay, okay. If two brothers, one a deaf mute and one competent, were married to two unrelated women, one a deaf mute and one a competent, and the husband of the deaf mute wife died, what should the competent husband of the competent wife do? He should marry her. If he then wishes to divorce her, he may. If the competent husband of the competent wife died, what should the deaf mute husband of the deaf mute wife do? He should marry her, and he can never divorce her. A woman who went with her husband overseas, and then there was amity between him and her, and peace in the world. And she came and said, "My husband died. She may marry." For if she said, "My husband died," she may be taken in yibum.
Oh,
If there was
oh,
amity between,
hold on. You went. Oh, I see what you're. Okay. There was a similar case between Zion and Ches. Okay, never mind. Aleph is my one. This is one of the new Mishnayos. So
okay, all right,
we'll leave those as Chazar because it's all pretty much the same principle anyway.
okay,
Okay. Ha'isha shehalcha hi ubala lebedina sayam. So the woman and her husband traveled overseas. Okay, and as far as we know, Shalom beino lebeina, there was no quarrel between him and her. Shalom be'olam, and there was no word of any war going on in where they were traveling. Ubas ve'amra, and now she returns home and she tells the Beis Din, Meis Bali, my husband died while I was overseas. Okay. Now, just like we believe a single witness in other cases, we believe a single witness in if it had been somebody else coming and telling about the husband's death, we also believe the wife herself when she comes home and says that her husband died. Okay, because even though normally we would require two witnesses for something like this, because the penalties on a woman are so steep if she is found if she doesn't do her own due diligence and her husband actually is alive and returns home, the penalties on her are very, very steep. So we rely on her to police herself and permit her
right,
to remarry. Okay. Meis Bali Tisya Bem. Also, if she dies without children, if the husband dies without children, that will permit her to marry her husband's brother. So we're even going to permit her to for Yibum if she comes back and reports that her husband died. Shalom beino lebeina umilchama ba'olam. But what happens if there's war in the world, even if there's peace between him and her, or ketata beino lebeina v'shalom ba'olam, or we know that there was not a happy marriage when they went overseas, even if there's peace in the world. Ubas amra meis bali, and she comes back and says, "My husband died." We don't believe her in either of these circumstances. Why? If she's having a quarrel with her husband, she might decide to permit herself to be remarried just in order to forbid herself to him, even if she's going to pay all the penalties of losing her kasuba and whatever else, and she just doesn't care because she hates him so much. Okay, and if there's war in the world, we are concerned that maybe she made a mistake. That her husband she thought her husband was killed by in the crossfire, and meanwhile he was just captured or he was wounded or whatever, and she just assumed that he was dead. Okay, so in these cases she is not believed to be remarried. Rabbi Yehuda Omer Leolam Eina Nemenes. We never believe her. Ela im kain bas bocha ubegadeha kruin. She must be visibly distraught and showing the signs of being in mourning for her husband. Otherwise, if we don't believe her. Amrullah, not said Chazal. We're not putting this up to whether she's emotionally detached or not, or whether she's just a trickster who can fake who can fake the crying scenes well. That's got nothing to do with it. If she either we believe her or we don't believe her. Achasov we accept her testimony, and it doesn't matter whether she's emotional about it or not. Okay. Beis Hillel Omrim. This is an interesting situation that Beis Hillel, the case where where they made this decision was in a situation where a woman and her husband were out in the field and collecting crops. collecting grain, and her husband dropped dead, maybe a heart attack or whatever. It doesn't matter, but she was the only witness of the fact that he died. And I don't know what the circumstances would have been that nobody could have gone to find his body and verify that he was dead. But no, Lamase, he died. Maybe he fell off a cliff into the sea or something like that. Who knows? Um, but at any rate, she says that he died, and uh, and Beis Hillel said, "Look, we only believe her. We only have this case where Chazal permitted it. Lo shemanu ele beba min hakatzir, where she came from the harvest. We have this case of where she came from the harvest. Not it's not that Beis Hillel are saying that it's only if she comes back from the wheat harvest and this happens. She's just saying it's the only case that we have is the case of the woman who came from the Katzir. Uva Samadina. So it must be in that country. Ukamase Shahaya, like the case that Chazal Paskin on where she was believed. Amr lehen Beis Shammai. Achas haba min katsir v'achas haba min zaysim. Why are you making any kind of distinction? It doesn't make any difference whether, just like it doesn't make any difference. And surely you would also agree that whether she comes from the wheat harvest or from the olive harvest, echaz haba min abatzir, or from the grape harvest, achas haba mi medina le medina, and it doesn't matter either whether she came from a different country and came and said that her husband died in a different country. We if we accept her testimony, we accept her testimony. One of these cases where Beis Shammai looks like they're ruling more leniently than Beis Hillel. Okay. Lo dibur chachamim el bekatzir el behove. The only reason that it said that thing about the katzir was because that was exactly the case. But the principle extends everywhere. V'chazru Beis Hillel lahoros ke Beis Shammai, and Beis Hillel accepted the point, and they said, "Okay, you're right, Beis Shammai. We're going to paskin like you." Beis Shammai Omrim, another case where Beis Shammai starts out more makil. Tina sevasitol kesubasa. Once she's allowed to remarry, she can claim her kesuba from her husband's possessions. Beis Hillel Omrim Tina sevelositol kesubasa. No, we only permit her to remarry. But she can't grab her husband's property just based on her own testimony. Amru lehen Beis Shammai. Seriously, it says Beis Shammai, hitaratim erva chamura. You're permitting her, if her husband is still alive, and you're permitting her to live with another man, that is an erva, and that is extremely chamor. Lo tatiras mamon akal. Why are you suddenly getting all fussed about the fact that she's claiming her kasuba? That's just money. Amru lehen Beis Hillel. So Beis Hillel said, look, matzina she'en ha'achim nichnasim lenachal al piha. So that even though she is allowed to remarry, we don't find that the rest of his property is divvied up among his brothers once the widow comes home. If we're not permitting anyone to go into his inheritance, then why should she be allowed to claim a kasuba? Amr lahem Beis Shammai, v'halo misefer kasuba nilmod. No, but we've got this is a special case. The woman's kasuba has got written in it, shehu kosev la. If you find yourself in a position where you are permitted to marry another person, then you are allowed to take whatever your entitlements are in the kasuba. And Beis Hillel said, actually, that's a good point. Chazru Beis Hillel lahoros kedivrei Beis Shammai, and they said, yeah, you're right. We recant and we're going to paskin like you now.
Okay.
Okay. Back to Yud Beis. Hey.
If she performed Kalisa before two judges or before three, but it was discovered that one was a relative or was qualified, Kalisa is not valid. But Rabbi Shimon and Rabbi Yochanan the Sanla validated. It once happened that someone performed Kalisa with only he and she were present in a prison, and then the case came before Rabbi Kiva and he validated it. The commandment of Kalitza is performed as follows. He and his Yevamos come to the court, and they give him advice appropriate to him. As it is said, and the elders of the city shall summon him and speak to him. She then says, my husband's brother refuses to establish a name for his brother in Israel. He is not willing to take me and Yubam, and he says, I do not want to take her. They said this in the holy language. Then his brother's wife shall approach him in the presence of the elders and remove his shoe from his foot and spit before him. Spittle discernible to the judges. And she shall declare, saying, so should be done to the man who would not build his brother's house. They used to dictate only until this point, but when Rebbe Harkness dictated under the Ela tree in the village of Etam and completed the entire chapter, it became the established custom to complete the entire chapter. And his name shall be called in Israel, and the house of the one whose shoe was removed. The commandment is incumbent on the judges and not on the disciples. But Yehuda says the commandment is incumbent upon all standing there to say, the one whose shoe is removed, the one whose shoe is removed, the one whose shoe is removed. Beit Shammai says only those who are betrothed may refuse, but Beit Hillel says both those who are betrothed and those who are married may refuse. Beit Shammai says only the husband may be refused, but not the Yavam. While Beit Hillel says both the husband and the Yavam may be refused. Beit Shammai says refusal may only be made in his presence, but Beit Hillel says it may be made whether in his presence or not. Beit Shammai says only in court, but Beit Hillel says whether in court or out of court. Beit Hillel said to Beit Shammai, she may refuse while a minor even 4 or 5 times. Beit Shammai replied, the daughters of Israel are not to be treated as promiscuous. Rather, she may refuse and wait until adulthood or refuse and marry. Okay. And no? Okay. Gimel Vav. Tax collectors who enter the house and likewise thieves who return utensils they had stolen are believed to say, we did not touch them. In Yerushalayim, they believe concerning Kodesh the entire year, and during the festival season, they believe even concerning Truma. If one opens his hands or begins using his dough for festival needs, Rabbi Yehuda says he may finish selling after the festival, and the sages say he may not finish. Once the festival is over, he will remove everything to facilitate the cleansing of the temple courtyard. If the day of the festival is Friday, they would not remove the vessels in deference to the honor of Shabbos. Rabbi Yehuda says not even if the day after the festival was Thursday, because the Kohanim were not free. How did they go about removing everything from the cleansing of the temple courtyard? They immersed the vessels that were in the temple after they had said to them, be careful not to touch the table and the menorah lest you contaminate it. All the vessels that were used in the temple had second and third replacement sets, so that if the first ones became contaminated, they would bring the second one to replace them. All vessels that were used in the temple require immersion except for the golden altar and the copper altar, because they are like earth. These are the words of Rabbi Eliezer, and the sages say because they are plated. Hajanalak.
Hajanalach Maseches Chagiga Hajanalach Seder Moed. Okay, tomorrow, Yoma Aleph Aleph. No, not Yoma. Yevamos.
Yevamos. Okay.
Yeah. Now's Yoma.
The story is like Yevamos from the beginning. Okay.
Yeah.
Yoma. And Yoma. Hey, Aleph. They brought him the ladle and the shovel, and they scooped up the cupped handfuls and placed it into the ladle. A big Kohen got according to the size, and a small Kohen according to his size. And this was the incense required measure. He took the shovel in his right hand and the ladle in his left. He would walk through the temple until he reached the space between the two curtains, which separated the holy from the holy of holies, and between them was a cubit. Rabbi Yossi says there was only one curtain, as it says, and the curtain shall divide for you between the holy and the holy of holies. The outer curtain was pinned up from the southern side, and the inner one from the northern side. He walked between them until he reached the northern side. When he reached the northern side, he turned his face southward, walking to the left alongside the curtain until he reached the ark. Reaching the ark, he would put the shovel between the two poles. He heaped the incense on the burning coals, and the whole chamber filled with smoke. He left, walking backward in the manner of his entry, and he prayed a short prayer in the outer chamber, but he did not prolong his prayer so as not to frighten the Jews. After the ark was taken away, a stone was there from the time of the early prophets, and it was called Shishia. His height was 3 fingers above the ground, and upon it he would place the shovel. Okay.
One more.
He took the blood from the one who was stirring it. He entered the place he had previously entered, stood in the place where he stood, and sprinkling from it 1 time upward and 7 times downward. But he did not aim at sprinkling either above or below, rather like one who whips. And this is how he would count: 1, 1 plus 1, 1 plus 2, 1 plus 3, 1 plus 4, 1 plus 5, 1 plus 6, 1 plus 7. Then he exited and put the vessel on the golden stand, which was in the holy.
Okay.
And Trumos. Okay, Trumos. Sorry, wait a mistake. Aleph.
Yeah.
Aleph. Right. One may not separate truma from oil for olives, which are due to be crushed, or from wine from grapes that are due to be trodden. But if he did separate his truma, but he must separate again The first by itself renders Truma, and one is liable for it to the added fifth, but not the second. One may separate Truma from oil for olives which are due to be preserved, and from wine for grapes which are due to be made into raisins. If one separated Truma from oil for olives intended for eating, from olives for olives intended for eating, from wine for grapes intended for eating, or from grapes for grapes intended for eating, and then decided to tread them, he need not separate Truma. One may not separate Truma from produce which is in a finished state for produce which is in an unfinished state, and from produce in an unfinished state for produce in a finished state, and from produce in an unfinished state for produce in an unfinished state. But if we did separate Truma, his Truma is Truma. Okay.
Okay.
And
Olos.
okay. Olive Zion. Limbs have no minimum size. Even a limb of a corpse smaller than an olive, or a limb of a carcass smaller than an olive, or a limb of a sheretz smaller than a lentil convey their Truma. There are 248 limbs in a person, 30 in the foot, 6 per toe, 10 in the ankle, 2 in the leg, 5 in the knee, 1 in the thigh, 3 in the hip, 11 ribs, 30 in the hand, 6 per finger, 2 in the forearm and 2 in the elbow, 1 in the upper arm and 4 in the shoulder, for a subtotal of 101 on one side and 101 on the other side, plus 18 vertebrae on the spine, 9 in the head, 8 in the neck, 6 in the chest, 5 in the genitals. Each of these limbs convey tumors via touching, carrying, or ohel. One is so when it contains sufficient flesh to heal, but if the limb does not contain sufficient flesh to heal, it conveys tumor via touching or carrying, but not via ohel. These convey tumor through ohel: a corpse, an olive volume of a corpse, an olive volume of netzel, a ladle full of corpse powder, a spine and the skull, a severed limb from a corpse, and a limb severed from a living body that have sufficient flesh to heal, and a quarter cup of bones. Even if it's less than most of the frame or less than the majority, most of the skeletal frame or numeral majority of the bones of a corpse, even if it comprises less than a quarter cup of bones, all of these convey tumor. How many bones are a numeral majority of the bones in the skeleton? 125.
Okay.
A quarter.
That's it.
Okay.
Okay, and
And then we have
adios.
Okay, Aleph Ches. Fetch of Truma, Beit Shammai says we must rub and soak it in a state of Tahara, but we feed it in a state of Tuma. Beis Hillel says we must soak it in Tahara, but we may rub it and feed it in a state of Tuma. Shammai says they should be eaten dry. Akiva says everything done with them may be done in the state of Tuma. If one converts into a silver seller copper coins of Master Sheni, Shammai says he exchanged copper coins for an entire seller, but Beis Hillel says a shekel's worth of silver and a shekel's coin worth of coins. But Meir says we may not consecrate silver and produce of Maisa Sheni into silver, but the sages permit it. If one changes a silver seller of Maisa Sheni into copper coins in Yerushalayim, Ben Shammai says he takes change for the entire seller in copper coins. Ben Hillel says he takes change for 1 shekel of the seller in silver, and for the other shekel of the seller of copper coins. Those who debate before the sages say he takes change for 3 dinners of the seller in silver, and the remaining due of the seller in copper coins. And Akiva says he takes change for 3 dinners of the seller in silver, and for the 4th dinner of silver, he takes for a quarter copper coins. And Bertopin says for the 4th dinner, he takes 4 aspers of silver. Shammai says he should leave the seller in the store and take successive amounts of food corresponding to it.
Okay. And we're done.
All right, terrific.
All right.
I'm going to try to stay awake today.
Have a good day.
Great day. Thanks. Bye.